This is the Ishi Weekly, the discipline of determined intent. I am Gareth Holebrook. Thought that leads to action, action that is thoughtful. In this podcast, I will explore the Ishi spiral through the lens of an ultra-endurance athlete, leadership coach, engineer, and farmer. The first few episodes will be excerpts from the book, the autobiographical sections, talking about Ironman, Coast to Coast, and other races I've taken part in. Enjoy. Kiwiman Part 1. Intentional and Persistent. SilverKris Lounge, Singapore Airport. My wife Thiri was asleep beside me with her head on my shoulder, still carrying the fatigue from Powerman Zofingen. We had crossed the line together in Switzerland after hours of hills and mutual suffering. We both then flew to Rotterdam for the ITU World Triathlon Champs and were satisfied with our performance, despite Powerman still being in our legs. The flight to Auckland was still 5 hours away, so I had some time to reflect. My body was wrecked, but my mind was restless, which is a familiar mismatch for me. It was probably after the 6th coffee that the thought finally formed. I did not want another polished race or another familiar cycle. I wanted something harsher, more stripped back, and harder to hide inside of. I started watching YouTube videos of Norseman Extreme Triathlon in Norway. At the time of writing, I am still trying to get a starting slot for it. It is everything that I seek in an endurance event. Within weeks, this impulse for the XTri found another name, the Kiwiman XTri. New Zealand was getting its own extreme distance race, built outside the Ironman circuit. Based in Taranaki, it was organised by Thor Hesselberg, director of Thor Hesselberg, which is like Norseman XTri. It also took place in Norway. Local cycling legend Blair Cox, who raced in Norway the year prior, persuaded Thor to bring it to New Zealand. There was no marketing gloss, no promise of spectacle, just a course description that read like a warning. When entries opened, I registered immediately, without studying the map. Curiosity and desire got there first. Discipline followed, which is how most of my serious commitments begin. The Kiwiman is stripped back by design. There is no theatre, no carnival, no sense that the day will carry you through if you falter. There is a lake swim in the dark, a brutal bike through the backcountry that includes 3 climbs up Mount Taranaki, and a run that climbs terrain that offers no compromise. The race felt built for private effort rather than public performance. That alone was enough to secure my loyalty. I first raced Kiwiman XTri in 2018 and finished 6th. In 2019, Thiri and I raced as a team, learning quickly that the event rewards coordination and restraint more than bravado. The race was cancelled in 2020 and again in 2022, both years I had entered, which only deepened its hold onto my calendar. By the time it returned, it had become a fixed reference point rather than a novelty. It was no longer something I had done, it was something I returned to. In the 2019 briefing, Blair announced that a double event was going to happen the following year. 2 longer than full Ironman distances over consecutive days over the same terrain. Without skipping a beat, I leaned over to Thiri. "I'll do it." She laughed while recoiling back a little. Something in me wanted to find the point where my body stops arguing politely and starts insisting. I wanted to see what remained when comfort, crowd noise, and novelty were removed. I eventually managed to perform this feat in 2021. Only 2 of us committed to the double XTri that year, Pulver End and me, which changed the atmosphere immediately. A standard Ironman has a field and a crowd, and both can distract you from the work. This felt like a personal challenge to the mountain and the weather, with 2 names written on the page. That scarcity of attention made the task feel both unusually heavy and more honest. The start of day 1 was surreal, just 2 athletes, crew and volunteers who stood in rain jackets under headlamps. The lake looked like oil in the dark. After we started with no pack around me, I had to create a rhythm alone and keep it. I exited first, slow by my standards, and I knew immediately that speed had become irrelevant. The bike began with stiff hands and a body that had not warmed properly. As the sun rose, the road tipped upwards, and kept tipping. Mist sat low, and the world reduced to the wheel, breath, and gradient. Pride delayed a clothing change when the wind stirred, and that mistake nearly cost me control on a descent. I stopped, waited for fear to settle, then continued. Because discipline sometimes looks like refusal to rush. The run was cut short by the weather as a storm closed the mountain, which was both a mercy and insult. I ran 36 kilometres and finished 5 minutes behind Paul after 14 hours of work. There was no celebration waiting, only soup, wet gear, and the logistics of staying functional. Sleep arrived in fragments and left early, because the body does not believe the day is done when it knows what's coming. Morning arrived without negotiation. Day 2 began with a question endurance athletes fear most. Can this be done again in the same tired body, with the same mind that has now proof of pain? The water appeared even darker the second morning, and trying to stand after the swim dropped me on all fours. Thiri and my business partner Horia hauled me upright, and in that moment my world was reduced to breathing and staying vertical. The first hour on the bike was grim and disorienting. Power numbers meant nothing, and heart rate sat stubbornly low, as if my system had decided to conserve rather than compete. Every sensation compelled me to stop, and every rationalization made perfect sense. I cried, and then I thought of this book. I kept turning on the pedals because forward was the only acceptable direction, even if progress was slow and ugly. That choice did not feel heroic, it felt contractual. I had a reason for completing this race, and that reason kept the pedals turning. As daylight strengthened, resistance softened into acceptance. The cold and soreness stopped being a story and became information that needed management. I ate, drank, and kept cadence steady, because small rules are easier to obey than big motivations. By mid-morning, rhythm returned in the blunt way it does when a body realizes quitting is not going to happen. The weather remained indifferent, which helped because it removed any hope of rescue. The run reopened my catalogue of old injuries and made each step feel like a negotiation. Morton's neuroma burned under my forefeet, and my brain tried to turn that into meaning. I stopped doing that and treated it as a signal that required adjustment, not philosophy. Paul caught me near the end, and we walked the last stretch together because racing had stopped being the point. The finish line was tape between cones in the rain, which suited the day. Afterwards came a kind of stillness that is only found when work is complete and there is nothing left to perform. The next morning, watching fog roll over on Mount Taranaki, it was clear why this race had claimed a permanent place in my life. Endurance is not capacity, because capacity is measurable and often misleading. Apologies for the rooster. It is persisting where the mind produces a persuasive argument for stopping. You continue anyway. It is also learning which arguments your mind prefers when it is trying to protect you from discomfort. It is easier to win arguments if you've had them in the past. This is where Gaman is necessary. It is about calm persistence without theatre. It is patience when the body becomes uncooperative, and patience when when it becomes opportunistic. The Kiwiman XTri forced me into that space long enough that Gaman stopped being a concept and became a memory. It also showed me that dignity under strain is not a personality trait, it is deliberate practice. I can see the arc now without forcing it into metaphor. Ishi was a commitment that held through the months before, when the race day was still abstract. Shugyo was a training block that built the base, the repetition that turned preparation into capability. Gaman was a 2-day exposure to strain when comfort disappeared and continuation became the job. Hansei came later, when the mind could study what happened without inventing a legend. I do not remember the finish as a triumphant experience. I remember the bitter cold of the start line, the private doubt on day 2, and the way my mind kept offering exits. I remember the moment where acceptance replaced bargaining and the work became straightforward again. The double did not make me special, but it did make me visible to myself. Triathlon builds great friendships, and I've supported or been supported by Paul several times. In the final stages of writing this book, I paced Paul as he ran the UTMB Tarawera 100-mile race in Rotorua, New Zealand. That experience has rekindled my love of endurance racing, and I have entered Kiwiman one more time, the week this book was launched. Thanks for listening to the Ishi Weekly. Please subscribe and find more content on Substack and YouTube. Ishi, The Discipline of Determined Intent, is available on Amazon and Kindle.